Breaking news out of Canada and the United States is sending shockwaves through political and economic circles. Former Bank of England governor and Canadian economist Mark Carney is reportedly furious after former President Donald Trump's latest move effectively crushed a growing alcohol boycott tied to U.S. Canada trade tensions. The fallout has left Canada scrambling, with critics warning that this could trigger an economic and political implosion north of the border. But here's the question: how did a boycott over alcohol, a product many people take for granted, become the flashpoint for one of the sharpest confrontations between Canada and Trump in recent memory? And more importantly, why is Carney, a man who once shaped global financial policies, suddenly at the center of this storm? This isn't just about beer, whiskey, or trade. It's about power, influence, and the fragile balance between two of the closest allies in the world. What we're watching unfold could reshape cross-border relations overnight, and the stakes are much bigger than most people realize. So, let's break down exactly what happened, why Carney is so outraged, and what this all means for both Canada and the United States moving forward. Introduction: to understand why this story matters, we need to rewind just a little. Canada and the U.S. share one of the largest and most complex trading relationships on the planet. Every single day, billions of dollars in goods flow across the border, everything from cars and steel to food and energy. But in recent months, tensions have been rising again, fueled by political disagreements, economic pressures, and Trump's relentless "America First" rhetoric as he re-emerges on the political stage. The alcohol boycott began as a symbolic protest tied to disputes over tariffs, pipelines, and energy policy. Canadian officials and activists encouraged people to stop buying American alcohol brands, hoping to send a message. It was meant to be more symbolic than practical, but Trump saw an opportunity. He went on the offensive, rallying his base and mocking the boycott as weak and self-destructive. Then, in a move few saw coming, Trump worked behind the scenes to strike favorable deals with American producers, effectively undercutting Canadian leverage and making their boycott strategy collapse. Enter Mark Carney. For years, Carney has been viewed as one of the most respected economic thinkers in Canada and abroad. He's been floated as a potential political leader in Canada and is seen by many as someone who understands how fragile Canada's economy can be in the face of U.S. dominance. For him, Trump's maneuvering wasn't just a political stunt. It was a direct blow to Canada's credibility and bargaining power. His outrage reflects a deeper fear that Canada could lose control of its economic narrative at a time when global uncertainty is already high. This clash over alcohol is only the tip of the iceberg, but it signals much larger battles to come. Number 1D, the symbolic power of alcohol at first glance. The idea that alcohol could trigger an international political storm might sound absurd. After all, we're not talking about oil, natural gas, or high-tech manufacturing, industries usually at the center of global disputes. But alcohol, especially in the form of beer, whiskey, and wine, holds a symbolic power that goes far beyond its price tag. These are products tied to culture, identity, and everyday life. When you order a pint of beer at a bar or pour a glass of wine at dinner, you're not just consuming a beverage, you're participating in a ritual that carries social, emotional, and even national meaning. And that's exactly why a boycott of alcohol became such a headline-grabbing move in the first place. Canadian organizers who launched the boycott understood this. They knew that telling people to stop buying American cars or electronics might not catch fire. Those items are expensive and not bought every day. But alcohol is something ordinary people buy weekly, sometimes daily. By targeting American alcohol brands, the boycott instantly became visible in grocery stores, restaurants, and pubs. It was a way of saying, we don't just disagree with Trump's policies, we're willing to make sacrifices in our daily lives to prove a point. But here's where things got complicated. Boycotts depend on unity and persistence. The minute people start slipping, ordering their favorite bourbon or grabbing their usual six-pack, the boycott loses credibility. And this is where Trump saw an opening. He reframed the issue from one of principle into one of culture. Instead of allowing Canada to portray the boycott as a noble stand, he mocked it as pointless, calling it weak, silly, and even anti-fun. In doing so, he tapped into a powerful truth. Alcohol isn't just an economic product, it's social glue. When people gather with friends or celebrate milestones, alcohol is often at the center. Asking Canadians to give it up wasn't just a political statement, it was asking them to sacrifice joy and tradition. So Trump turned the tables. By ridiculing the boycott, he made it look elitist and joyless, exactly the kind of thing his supporters love to rally against. Suddenly, the story wasn't Canada boycotts American alcohol, it became Trump crushes Canada's weak protest. This is the symbolic power of alcohol. It's not about numbers on a balance sheet, it's about perception, pride, and who gets to control the narrative. And in this round, Trump made sure he did. Number 2, Canada's vulnerable position. When we talk about U.S. Canada trade, one fact stands out immediately. Canada relies far more on the United States than the United States relies on Canada. Nearly 75% of Canada's exports head south of the border, while only about 18% of U.S. exports go north. That imbalance means that in almost any dispute, Washington has the bigger stick. Canadian leaders know this, but time and again they try symbolic strategies like boycotts to push back against U.S. pressure. Unfortunately, history shows those tactics rarely succeed. The alcohol boycott is a perfect example of Canada's vulnerability. The idea was simple: hit U.S. producers where it hurts by cutting off a consumer base. But here's the problem. Canada simply doesn't make up a large enough share of the U.S. alcohol market to do real damage. If Canadians stop buying Jack Daniels or Budweiser, American companies still have huge domestic demand plus exports to Europe, Asia, and beyond. The symbolic protest might sting for a week in the headlines, but economically it barely registers in the United States. And that's why the boycott backfired so quickly. Trump capitalized on this imbalance. He knows that Canada cannot afford to escalate trade disputes for long without hurting itself more than the U.S. He mocked the boycott, but he also quietly worked to shore up American producers, highlighting deals and trade opportunities that made them stronger. In other words, while Canadians were trying to pressure U.S. companies, Trump was making sure those companies had no reason to worry. It was like bringing a knife to a gunfight. The vulnerability goes deeper than just alcohol. Canada's entire economy is tied to the U.S. in ways that limit its room for maneuver. Energy exports, auto parts, lumber, these sectors depend heavily on access to U.S. markets. That means when Canada tries to play hardball, it risks blowback that can ripple through its economy, hitting jobs and growth. It's not just about consumers giving up bourbon, it's about auto workers in Ontario or oil workers in Alberta worrying that the next dispute will hit their paychecks. This reality leaves Canadian leaders in a constant bind. Do they push back against U.S. dominance and risk economic pain at home? Or do they swallow their pride and keep the relationship smooth, even when Trump's rhetoric feels humiliating? The alcohol boycott was an attempt to split the difference, make a stand without risking too much. But its collapse proved the deeper truth. Canada's vulnerable position means symbolic protests are rarely enough. Without a stronger strategy, Ottawa will always be reacting to Washington rather than setting the terms. Number 3, Carney's anger and what it represents. Mark Carney's outrage over the collapse of the alcohol boycott is about far more than whiskey sales or beer distribution. Carney has spent his career building a reputation as a steady, highly respected economic leader. He served as governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, giving him a rare global stature. For him, credibility and confidence in markets aren't abstract, they are the foundation of national strength. So when Canada's boycott fizzled under Trump's counterattack, Carney saw not just a tactical failure, but a dangerous crack in Canada's broader economic positioning. Carney understands something most ordinary citizens don't often think about. Markets are built on perception as much as hard numbers. When Canada launches a boycott and it collapses, the message to global investors is that Canada doesn't have the clout to follow through. That, in turn, can discourage confidence in Canada's ability to stand up in bigger disputes over energy pipelines, auto trade, or digital policy. In other words, if Canada can't sustain a boycott over alcohol, how will it credibly defend itself in billion-dollar negotiations? Carney's fury also reflects a deeper frustration with the style of Canadian politics. He has long warned that Canada's leaders often underestimate the speed and ruthlessness of U.S. politics, especially when Trump is involved. Carney sees Trump not as an ordinary political rival, but as a disruptor who thrives on making others look weak. By launching a boycott without preparing for Trump's inevitable counterpunch, Canadian leaders played right into his hands. For Carney, this is a sign of poor strategy and short-term thinking. But his anger also points to a larger question. What role should someone like him play in shaping Canada's response? Carney has been floated as a potential future prime minister, and his reputation as a grown-up in the room appeals to many Canadians tired of being overshadowed by U.S. politics. His outrage could be a preview of the leadership he would bring, tougher, more pragmatic, and more willing to confront uncomfortable truths about Canada's vulnerabilities. In short, Carney's anger is not just personal. It's symbolic of a broader anxiety within Canada's elite that the country is losing control of its economic story. If Canada can't protect even symbolic gestures from being dismantled by Trump, then its ability to defend larger national interests is in question. Carney is sounding an alarm, and whether Canadians listen could shape their political future. Number 4. Trump's political strategy. To understand why Trump handled the alcohol boycott the way he did, you have to understand his political playbook. Trump thrives on confrontation, and he knows how to turn even small disputes into major victories by framing them in ways that resonate emotionally with his supporters. The boycott gave him the perfect stage to do just that. Instead of treating the boycott as a minor Canadian protest, Trump elevated it into a test of strength. He mocked it in rallies, calling it weak and pathetic, and portrayed it as another example of foreign leaders trying and failing to challenge America. This framing plays directly into his America First brand. His base doesn't care about the fine print of trade statistics. They care about the image of Trump standing tall against critics, whether they're in Washington, Brussels, or Ottawa. Trump also understood the cultural angle. Alcohol is not just an economic product. It's wrapped in ideas of freedom, leisure, and tradition. By ridiculing the boycott, he made it sound like Canada was trying to take away people's fun, their right to enjoy a beer or bourbon. That gave him the chance to cast himself as the defender of ordinary lifestyles, while painting Canada as joyless and overly political. For a populist like Trump, that's gold. Beyond rhetoric, Trump used the moment to demonstrate practical strength. He worked to secure deals with American alcohol producers, signaling that the boycott wouldn't just fail, but that it might even benefit U.S. businesses. This allowed him to claim victory on two fronts: culturally, by mocking the protest, and economically, by ensuring the industry never felt threatened. It's classic Trump: turn a challenge into a stage to project dominance. Politically, this strategy fits into a larger pattern. Trump's approach to international relations has never been about quiet diplomacy. It's about visible wins that can be sold to voters. Crushing a Canadian boycott may not matter much in terms of dollars and cents, but it feeds the story that he is the only leader who can put America back on top. That's the narrative his campaign thrives on. For Trump, the boycott was less about trade policy and more about theater. He used it as a prop to reinforce his identity as a fighter, someone who humiliates opponents and comes out stronger. And in today's media-driven politics, that narrative often matters more than the actual economic outcome. Number 5. The bigger implications for U.S.-Canada relations. While the alcohol boycott may fade from headlines, its consequences for U.S.-Canada relations could linger far longer. On the surface, it looks like a minor trade squabble, the kind of thing that blows over in weeks. But beneath the surface, it exposes a deeper erosion of trust and balance between the two countries. For decades, Canada and the U.S. have managed disputes with relative stability. Whether it was over lumber, dairy, or energy pipelines, both sides knew the relationship was too important to let things spiral out of control. But Trump's approach to politics has changed that equation. He thrives on conflict, and rather than smoothing over differences, he amplifies them to score political points. That leaves Canada in a difficult position. How do you maintain a cooperative relationship with a neighbor who sees confrontation as a winning strategy? The collapse of the boycott also sends a troubling signal internationally. Other countries watching this episode may conclude that Canada lacks the leverage to stand firm in disputes. That perception could weaken Canada's bargaining power not just with the U.S., but also with Europe, China, and other trading partners. If Canada looks unable to defend its own strategies, it risks being sidelined in bigger global negotiations. Domestically, the incident could fuel political debates about leadership. Carney's outrage highlights a growing divide between Canadian elites